She did not scream when she found out. She did not throw things. She did not call his phone 40 times. She did not show up at the office demanding answers in front of his staff. She sat at her kitchen table, 7 months pregnant, and refilled her friend's coffee. That is the kind of woman Serena Calloway was. And that composure, that quiet, unbreakable composure, is exactly what Daniel and his team of 3 attorneys spent the next 4 months trying to destroy. They attacked her finances. They leaked stories to the press. They pulled her medical records and weaponized the worst afternoon of her life in open court. They questioned whether the child she was carrying was even his. They had more money, more experience, more time to prepare. What they did not have was the truth. And they did not know, when they submitted their own evidence to the court, that buried inside it was a secret so devastating it would collapse their entire case in 87 seconds. Serena Calloway walked into that courtroom already losing. What happened next, nobody saw coming. Value statement. This story is not just about one woman's divorce. It is about what it looks like to keep going when everything is being taken from you at once, and why documenting your worth, trusting the right people, and refusing to be rattled is sometimes the most powerful thing you can do. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of someone you know or something you have been through, share it with one person today. That one share might be exactly what somebody needs to hear right now. Subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. Leave a comment below and tell us, what was the moment that stayed with you? We read every single one.
I want you to imagine the worst moment of your life. Not a bad day, not a disappointing year. The worst moment. The one where everything you believed about your world turns out to be a story someone else wrote about you without your knowledge. Now imagine it happening in front of 40 strangers, 3 court reporters, and the man who stood beside you at an altar 7 years ago and promised, in front of everyone who mattered, that he would choose you every single day. Now imagine you are 8 months pregnant. That is not a hypothetical. That is a Tuesday morning in February for Serena Calloway. And before this story is over, you are going to watch her lose everything twice, almost lose it a 3rd time, collapse in open court in front of journalists and lawyers, and the man who broke her, and still walk out of that building with more than she walked in with. But first, we need to talk about the house on Elmwood Lane, because that is where it started, and that is where it ended, and nothing that happened in between was anything she could have predicted. The house on Elmwood Lane in Charlotte, North Carolina, was the kind of house that made people slow their cars down when they drove past. Not because it was a mansion. It was not. It was a craftsman-style home with a wide front porch, dark green shutters, and a hydrangea bush along the front walk that Serena had planted herself on a rainy April Saturday 3 years earlier, while Daniel stood on the porch holding 2 coffees and laughing at the mud on her knees. She remembered that afternoon now the way you remember things after they have been ruined. The particular sound of his laugh, the way he handed her the coffee without being asked, exactly how she liked it, 2 sugars and just enough cream to turn it the color of caramel. The way the rain smelled against the warm soil. She had pressed the root ball of the hydrangea into the ground with both hands, and felt something that she could only describe as permanent, like she was planting something that would outlast the ordinary difficulties of life and still be standing, blue and enormous, long after the small problems had passed. She had been right about the hydrangeas, wrong about everything else. Serena Calloway was 34 years old. She had a master's degree in communications from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, which she had earned while working part-time and paying her own rent. She had spent 8 years as a brand strategist before she and Daniel had made a decision together. A real decision, with spreadsheets and long conversations at the kitchen table, that her skills were more valuable inside his company than outside it. Meridian Consulting Group was a financial strategy firm that Daniel had built from a rented office and a second-hand desk in downtown Charlotte. By the time Serena stepped back from her own career to work within Meridian, the company was profitable, but not yet stable. She had redesigned their client communication system. She had rebuilt their brand identity from the ground up, hiring a designer and directing every element of the visual language that now appeared on every Meridian proposal, every website page, every piece of client correspondence. She had cultivated relationships with partners that Daniel, for all his brilliance with numbers, could not have maintained, because Daniel spoke fluently in data and struggled with the softer architecture of human connection. She had been, though no official title existed for it, the invisible foundation of everything Meridian became. Daniel Calloway was 37. He was not a billionaire. He was something, in some ways, more dangerous, which was a believably successful man. He was featured twice in the Charlotte Business Journal. He coached Little League on Saturday mornings when he was not traveling. He wore his late father's simple silver watch every day, without exception, and he remembered the names of everyone's children at every dinner party, which was the kind of detail that made people trust a man completely before they had reason to. He was very good at being trusted, which made what he did to Serena so much more precise. She noticed the changes before she admitted to herself what they meant. The phone screen going dark when she walked into the room, the business trips that extended by a day, then two, then stretched into a week without adequate explanation, the laughter that had once filled their kitchen on Sunday mornings, while they made eggs and argued pleasantly about which podcast to play. That laughter had gone somewhere else without notice and stopped coming home. She told herself it was the pressure of success. She told herself he was tired. She had told herself many things because she was 7 months pregnant and she needed the world she had built to still be standing. Her friend, Lauren Pierce, found out first. Lauren was an architect, which meant her brain was professionally calibrated to notice things that did not fit the established structure. She had seen Daniel's car parked outside a wine bar on East 7th Street on a Wednesday night. She thought nothing of it the first time. Then she saw it again the following Wednesday and the Wednesday after that. On the fourth Wednesday, she walked past the window. She saw Daniel sitting across from a woman. Their hands were on the table between them, not quite touching, but in that precise territory where almost touching communicates more than contact ever could. Lauren recognized the woman. Victoria Hargrove, Director of Client Strategy at Meridian Consulting Group. A woman Serena had met at company events, had spoken with at dinners, had once complimented on a presentation that Serena herself had helped structure. Lauren did not send a text. She drove to Elmwood Lane and sat down at Serena's kitchen table and said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to sit down first." Serena was 26 weeks pregnant. She sat down. There is a specific silence that lives in the 3 seconds between someone saying those words and the actual telling. Serena said later that in those 3 seconds she already knew, not the details, just the shape of it. The body knows before the mind admits it. Lauren showed her the photographs she had taken through the window. Time-stamped, ordinary, completely devastating. Serena looked at them for a long time. Then she said, "How is your coffee? It is getting cold." Lauren blinked. "What? Your coffee? You drove all the way over here. The least I can do is make sure it is warm." She stood up. She refilled Lauren's mug. She sat back down, and then, quietly and completely, she fell apart. She confronted Daniel that same night at 10:47 when he came home from wherever he had actually been. She was sitting at the kitchen table with every light in the house turned on. He walked in and stopped. She said his affair partner's name. He went still. Then he sat down. He did not deny it. She gave him credit for that later, with great reluctance and considerable effort. How long, she said. 14 months, he said. 6 of those months, she had been carrying their child. She asked him to leave. He packed a bag. As he walked out the front door, she noticed he took the silver watch, his father's watch, and that small practical detail in the middle of devastation made the whole thing real in a way that nothing else had managed to. She stood in the kitchen after he left and listened to the house, which was now a different kind of quiet than it had ever been before. The divorce papers arrived 11 days later. 11 days. Serena held them at the kitchen table and understood immediately what they meant. Papers this clean, this precise, this fully formed, were not drafted in 11 days. Daniel had consulted an attorney before she confronted him, possibly before Lauren had called. He had been planning this while she was planning a nursery. Her attorney was a woman named Margaret Doyle. Margaret was 51 years old, 5 feet 2 inches tall, and had been handling high-conflict divorce cases in Mecklenburg County for 22 years. She wore pearl earrings every single day, without exception, kept a small leather notebook in which she wrote everything by hand, and had a particular courtroom habit of letting opposing counsel finish their entire argument before she responded. The pause she left was calculated to last exactly long enough to make them wonder if they had made a mistake. They usually had. They met on a Thursday morning in Margaret's office on South Tryon Street. The office was organized and undecorated, which Serena found reassuring. There were no diplomas on display, no awards arranged for effect, just files, notes, and 2 chairs across from a desk that had clearly been used hard for a long time. Daniel's team is going to argue you were a dependent spouse, Margaret said. They will minimize your contributions to Meridian and argue that his success belongs entirely to him. They will be systematic about it. Can they do that? Serena asked. Margaret looked at her over her reading glasses. They can try. Our job is to make trying cost them. Serena liked her immediately. Daniel's attorney was Clifford Baines, 60 years old, silver-haired, known in Charlotte legal circles as the attorney you hired when you wanted to win by exhaustion. He filed motions with the consistency of a man who understood that resources were a weapon, that grinding the other side down financially and emotionally was often more effective than any single legal argument. He had a reputation, and he had earned it. Within 3 weeks of the initial filing, Baines had challenged every financial document Serena's team submitted, opened questions about the valuation of 3 separate assets, and filed a motion requesting a DNA test to verify the paternity of the child Serena was carrying. A DNA test. When Margaret called to tell her, Serena was standing in the half-assembled nursery, holding a mobile she had bought at a craft fair in October. Little wooden birds painted in soft yellow and white. She sat down on the floor of the nursery, still holding the mobile. She sat there for a while. Then she called Lauren. Here is something that nobody tells you about high-conflict divorce cases, and I want to say it plainly because it matters. The paternity challenge was not about truth. Daniel knew the truth. His attorneys knew the truth. The challenge was a legal strategy designed to do 2 specific things. First, it was designed to humiliate Serena publicly, to raise a question mark over her character in a proceeding that would have journalists and observers present. Second, it was designed to rattle her, because a rattled client, Margaret told her in their next meeting, makes mistakes. So we stay calm, we stay prepared, and we let the truth do what it always does. What does it always do? Serena asked. Margaret set down her pen. It surfaces, every single time. 3 weeks before the trial date, Serena received what Margaret called the opening salvo. Daniel's team had hired a forensic accountant named Raymond Fisk. His report argued that Serena's role at Meridian had been, in his formal language, ancillary and social in nature, with no measurable impact on revenue generation. He had calculated her financial contribution to the marriage through her work at the company. The number he arrived at was $14,000 for 7 years. Serena stared at that number in the document for a long time. She thought about the weekend she had flown to Houston because a major client's wife had just been diagnosed with cancer, and a phone call had not seemed like enough. She thought about the Atlanta dinner in 2021, where she had personally saved a $2 million contract by staying at the table for 4 hours and listening to a partner who needed to be heard before he was ready to commit. She thought about the brand redesign and the communication system and the events she had organized and the relationships she had built from the ground up. $14,000. Then, 3 days later, while she was meeting with Margaret to prepare their counter-argument, her phone rang. It was her bank. Her personal savings account had been flagged for review. Daniel's team had filed a motion arguing that a wire transfer Serena had made 8 months earlier, money she had sent to her mother to help cover a medical bill, constituted dissipation of marital assets. They were attempting to hold her legally accountable for helping her sick mother pay a hospital bill. Serena had to leave the meeting. She sat in the parking garage in her car for 20 minutes with her hands in her lap and the engine off. She pressed both palms against her round belly and breathed slowly. This was not a divorce. She understood that clearly now. This was a demolition. And the people doing the demolishing had more experience, more resources, and had started earlier than she had. But they had not, she thought, sitting in that parking garage, factored in Margaret Doyle. And they had not factored in the fact that 7 years of invisible work had left a very visible paper trail, if you knew where to look. Margaret knew where to look. She had found a witness. His name was Patrick Holt, former vice president of client relations at Meridian, who had left the company in 2022. He had been present at the Atlanta dinner. He had watched Serena work that room and pull that contract back from the edge, with patience and skill that he had described to colleagues afterward as some of the best client relationship management he had ever personally witnessed. He was willing to say so in court, voluntarily, no subpoena required. When Margaret called with the news, Serena was eating cereal at her kitchen counter at 9 in the evening because she had not had the energy to cook. She put down the spoon. "He will testify," she said. Voluntarily, Margaret confirmed. He said, and I am quoting him directly, "Somebody needs to tell the truth about what that woman actually did for that company." Serena felt something loosen in her chest. A careful, small, genuine hope. She should have known, given the nature of this particular story, that hope was about to cost her something. Patrick Holt called Margaret's office 48 hours before his deposition date. He was withdrawing. He was sorry. He hoped Serena would understand. He could not fully explain, but he was sorry, and he hoped she would understand. He was a partner in a new business venture, a venture that had recently received significant investment from a firm with close financial ties to Meridian Consulting Group. Margaret delivered this news in person. She sat across from Serena and said it plainly, because she did not believe in softening things that could not be softened. She watched Serena's face process the information. "He was pressured," Serena said. "Almost certainly. Can we prove it?" "Not in time," Margaret said. Serena looked out the window at the hydrangeas, which were bare in February. She sat with the news for a moment. Then she said, "Okay, what is next?" Not as a question, as a decision. That same week, a story appeared in the Charlotte Observer's business section. Not front page. Inside, midsection, 4 paragraphs. But it was there. The story referenced sources close to Meridian Consulting Group and suggested that Daniel Calloway's estranged wife had, during the marriage, created friction in client relationships that had cost the company revenue. The story was fabricated entirely, but it was specific. It referenced a real client, a real timeline, a real meeting that Serena had actually attended. Whoever had fed the information to the reporter had access to internal records. Daniel's team denied involvement. They denied it well. Margaret filed a motion objecting to the story's potential influence on proceedings. The judge noted it. The story remained online. Here's what Serena had not been warned about. 3 of the professional contacts who had agreed to speak on her behalf quietly withdrew their availability after the story ran. Not because they believed it, but because they did not want the exposure. They had professional reputations and business relationships, and the visibility of a contested divorce case was not something they were willing to absorb. People protect themselves, even good people, even people who know the truth. This is not a condemnation. It is simply what happens, and knowing it happens is the first step toward not being destroyed by it. Serena's mother, Patricia Whitmore, drove up from Wilmington when she heard. She was 63 years old, a retired school principal with sharp eyes and the economical communication style of a woman who had spent 30 years figuring out exactly which words were necessary and which were not. She made Serena a cup of tea that night and sat across from her at the kitchen table and said 3 words. "He is desperate." Serena looked at her. "Desperate people make mistakes," Patricia said. "Let him make his." And then the third blow arrived. 6 days before the trial, Daniel's team filed a new motion. They had obtained, through means that Margaret was already challenging as a separate legal matter, a partial medical record from an emergency room visit Serena had made 2 years earlier. She had gone in for severe anxiety symptoms, chest tightness, difficulty breathing, a panic response that had lasted one afternoon and resolved completely with no follow-up treatment and no ongoing diagnosis. Daniel's team filed it as evidence of psychological instability. They argued that a woman who had once experienced a panic attack in an emergency room was an unreliable witness to her own marriage and an uncertain custodial parent. Serena read the filing at 11:30 at night at her kitchen table under the overhead light. She read it twice. Then she closed the laptop and sat in the silence of the kitchen for a moment. Then she walked to the nursery. She sat in the glider chair she had assembled herself in October, following instructions on her living room floor on a Sunday afternoon, while a playlist she had made for the baby played from her phone. She looked at the mobile. The little wooden birds, yellow and white. She let herself feel, for exactly 20 minutes, everything she had been managing and compressing and setting aside. The exhaustion, the grief, the particular devastation of having the worst afternoon of her adult life extracted from a medical record and placed into a court filing. The specific cruelty of it. 20 minutes. Then she picked up her phone and called Margaret. "I need you to tell me," she said, "that this is the last thing they have." There was a pause on the line. "I cannot promise that," Margaret said, "but I can tell you something I believe to be true. People who fight this dirty do it because they are afraid of losing fairly. And people who are afraid of losing fairly, in my experience, usually do." Serena exhaled slowly. "Okay," she said, "then let us make sure they lose." This is the moment the story turns. Not in the courtroom, not with a verdict or a ruling or a dramatic revelation. Right here, at 11:47 in the evening, in a nursery with a mobile and a glider chair and a woman who was tired down to her foundations and chose, anyway, to keep going. That choice is the whole story. Serena's mother made pancakes. Not because pancakes were appropriate to the occasion, or because anyone was particularly hungry, because Patricia Whitmore had made pancakes on every high-stakes morning of Serena's life. The morning of her college entrance exams, the morning she defended her master's thesis, the morning of her wedding. Patricia was not about to break the pattern, simply because the stakes were higher than they had ever been. "I do not know if I can eat," Serena said. "You will eat," Patricia said. "You're feeding 2 people." She ate the pancakes. Serena dressed carefully. A navy maternity dress that was professional without being severe. Low heels because her feet had been swollen for 3 weeks, and she had made peace with that fact entirely. Her grandmother's simple, gold earrings. Her hair pulled back softly in the way she wore it when she needed to feel organized. She stood in front of the mirror in the bedroom that had been solely hers for the past 2 months and looked at her reflection for a long moment. Then she spoke quietly, to herself and to the child moving gently inside her. "We are going to be okay," she said. "I do not know exactly how yet, but we are." Lauren arrived at 7:15 with coffee, 2 sugars, and just enough cream to turn it the color of caramel, because that was the kind of friend Lauren Pierce was. They did not talk much on the drive. The Charlotte skyline was gray and sharp in the February morning, the kind of cold that is clarifying rather than harsh. "You ready?" Lauren asked as they pulled into the courthouse parking lot. "No," Serena said. "Let us go." Mecklenburg County Family Court was not dramatic in its architecture. It was functional. Fluorescent lights, wood paneling, a smell of old paper, and floor wax that seemed to be the universal signature of institutional justice. Judge Christine Hartwell presided. 53 years old, former civil litigator, known in local legal circles for 2 things: absolute procedural precision and a complete unwillingness to tolerate courtroom theater. Serena found her immediately reassuring. Daniel arrived with Clifford Baines and 2 junior associates who moved around him with the coordinated efficiency of people who had rehearsed this moment. He was well-dressed, well-rested, carrying himself with the particular ease of a man who had been told repeatedly by expensive attorneys that he was going to win. He looked at Serena when he walked in, just for a moment, and something crossed his face in that moment that was not quite guilt and not quite nothing. It was the expression of a man who had made a choice a long time ago and was only now standing in this fluorescent light with 40 people watching, beginning to understand its full weight. Then he looked away. He did not look at her again for the rest of the morning. Victoria Hargrove was not in the courtroom. That was the first thing Serena noticed after Daniel. Victoria, whose presence at every Meridian event had been professional and constant for the past 4 years, was not here. That absence was interesting. She filed it away. The gallery held journalists, observers, 2 Meridian employees, she recognized, and Lauren, who had taken a seat in the front row of the public section and had the focused, quiet expression of a person who was prepared to stay as long as necessary. Clifford Baines opened with precision. He painted Serena as a supported spouse, not a contributing partner. Pleasant at events, capable with people, ultimately ornamental. He invoked Raymond Fisk's forensic accounting report with the confidence of a man who had used expert witnesses effectively for 30 years. He raised the paternity question with the careful language of a professional who understood exactly how close to the line he could walk without crossing it. He suggested, without stating directly, that the full picture of Serena Calloway's character and contributions remained, as he phrased it, subject to legitimate question. Margaret listened to all of it with her hands folded on the table and her expression entirely neutral. She took notes in her small leather notebook. She let him finish completely. Then she rose, buttoned her jacket, and approached the bench with the unhurried confidence of someone who had no anxiety about the outcome. "Your Honor," she said, "opposing counsel has presented a very detailed portrait of a woman who did not exist. We would like to introduce the court to the woman who actually did." Margaret's case was not emotional. That was the genius of it. She did not talk about betrayal. She did not reference the 14 months of deception or the cruelty of the paternity motion or the weaponized medical record. She presented 43 documents that told the story of Serena Calloway's contributions to Meridian Consulting Group in the only language that a financial court understood with precision: numbers, contracts, timelines, and outcomes. She began with the Houston trip. A client named Harrison Burke, whose wife had been diagnosed with breast cancer in October of 2020, had been considering pulling his company's contract with Meridian. The dollar value of that contract was $1.8 million annually. Serena had flown to Houston on a Tuesday, not because Daniel had asked her to, but because she had assessed the situation and understood that a phone call was insufficient. She had spent 2 days with the Burke family. She had not discussed business at all during those 2 days. She had simply been present in the way that very few people know how to be present, and she had left without asking for anything. Harrison Burke had renewed his contract the following week. He had sent a letter to Daniel Calloway, which Margaret now submitted as Exhibit 14, in which he wrote that Serena's visit had demonstrated a quality of human attention that he had never encountered from any professional relationship in 30 years of business, and that this quality alone was sufficient reason to maintain his company's partnership with Meridian indefinitely. Margaret submitted the letter. She moved on. The Atlanta contract, $2 million. The dinner that had lasted 4 hours. Email correspondence from the partner involved, submitted as Exhibit 21, which named Serena directly as the reason he had reconsidered his decision to withdraw. The brand redesign of 2019. A formal assessment from an independent brand consultant, submitted as Exhibit 27, which attributed a measurable increase in new client inquiries to the redesign and calculated its market impact at an estimated value of $300,000 in new business generated within 18 months of implementation. 4 written declarations from former Meridian employees, submitted in advance of the trial, secured quietly before Daniel's team knew they existed, from people whose livelihoods were not connected to Meridian and who had nothing to lose by telling the truth. Margaret built it brick by brick. She was unhurried. She did not perform. She simply laid fact after fact after fact in a line that had only one possible destination. Clifford Baines objected 17 times. Judge Hartwell sustained 4. She overruled 13. After the 13th overruling, Baines adjusted his tie. 4 minutes later, he adjusted it again. These were small movements, barely visible. Margaret noticed. She wrote nothing in her notebook about it, but she noticed, and the noticing told her something about the architecture of his confidence. Serena watched the junior associates writing faster. Their legal pads, which had been neat at the start of the morning, were becoming dense with notes that had a different quality than preparatory notes. These were reactive notes, catch-up notes, the notes of people recalibrating. And here is something important that I want to say to you directly, because it matters beyond this particular story. If you have ever worked in a partnership, whether romantic or professional, or both, document your contributions in real time, not because you expect things to go wrong, not because you are preparing for betrayal, but because memory is contested in disputes and paper is not. The emails you sent that led to a decision, the relationships you cultivated, the work you did that had no title but had real impact. Keep a record, not obsessively, but consistently. because it is one of the most protective things you can do for yourself. Serena had kept records, not strategically, not in anticipation of this courtroom. She had kept them because she was organized, because she valued clarity, because documentation was simply how she worked. Those records were now Exhibits 1 through 43, arranged in chronological order in Margaret Doyle's leather portfolio. It was late morning when the room changed. It happened at 11:14 in the morning. Margaret was mid-sentence, detained, presenting documentation from the Atlanta meeting when Serena felt it. A wave of dizziness so complete and sudden that the courtroom seemed to tilt sideways like a ship in slow water. The fluorescent lights above her intensified and then contracted. The sounds in the room went underwater. She pressed her palm flat against the edge of the table. Breathe. Just breathe. She took one breath. The room steadied. She took a second. The third did not come the way she needed it to. Her body made a decision without consulting her, and she went sideways in her chair. Lauren was over the gallery railing before the court officer reached the aisle. She had been watching Serena for the past 40 minutes with the architectural attention she gave to anything that mattered, and she had seen the shift in Serena's shoulders, the slight forward drop of her head, 2 minutes before it happened. Margaret turned from the podium in the same moment and said Serena's name with a sharpness that cut through everything else in the room. Judge Hartwell was on her feet. Clear the gallery. Medical assistance immediately. The room erupted and then reorganized itself around the emergency with the particular efficiency that crisis produces. A court officer moved fast. A second one was already on the radio. Margaret was on one knee beside Serena, one hand firm on her shoulder, saying her name steadily and repeatedly. Lauren had Serena's wrist between her fingers, counting. Daniel Calloway stood up. He did not rush forward. He did not call out. He simply stood, and his face, the composed, polished, carefully managed face he had worn since walking through that door, was completely gone. What was underneath it was not comfortable to look at. It was raw and young and entirely unprepared for itself. Clifford Baines put a hand on his arm and said something low and fast. Daniel did not respond. Serena came back slowly. The room assembled itself piece by piece, the way things do after they have scattered. The fluorescent lights, the wood paneling, Margaret's face close to hers, steady and watching. The first thing she heard, clearly, was Lauren's voice. "You are here," Lauren said. "I am here," Serena said. Her voice belonged to someone who had traveled a long distance. "The baby." "Moving," Serena said, because Claire was. She had been this entire time, that small, continuous presence, unhurried and certain. "She is okay." Lauren closed her eyes briefly. "Good." The EMT who responded was a young woman named Brooke, who could not have been older than 24. She assessed Serena's vitals with brisk competence, checked the baby's position, asked clear questions, and then looked around the wood-paneled courtroom at the lawyers and court officers and journalists with the expression of someone cataloging an unexpected environment. "This is a lot of room to pass out in," she said, with complete professional sincerity. Serena laughed, unexpectedly, fully, the kind of laugh that comes from somewhere deep and surprised and real. Lauren made a sound that was half laugh and half something more complicated. The tension in the room broke slightly, like ice shifting in early spring. Judge Hartwell cleared the gallery of non-essential personnel. The room became smaller and quieter. What remained was the legal teams, the court officers, Lauren, and one credentialed journalist who had stayed near the back wall. Clifford Baines rose immediately. "Your Honor, given the circumstances, we respectfully request a continuance. The emotional climate of these proceedings." "Sit down, counselor." He sat. Judge Hartwell looked at Serena, who had been helped back to her chair and was upright, her back straight, her hands folded, her chin level. It had cost her something visible, that posture, and the judge recognized the cost. "Ms. Calloway, we can adjourn. No one will think less of you." Serena looked at her directly. "I would like to continue, Your Honor," she said. Quiet, absolute. Judge Hartwell studied her for a moment. Then she gave a single nod, the kind that one person gives another when they recognize something they respect. She reached for the sealed envelope that had been sitting on the bench since the morning began. The envelope had been there since before anyone arrived. Sealed, marked with the court's formal designation. It contained the results of the DNA test that Daniel's team had formally requested, conducted under court supervision, reviewed by an independent laboratory called Nova Diagnostics, and filed with the court 3 days prior. Margaret had seen it when she set up her materials that morning. She had not looked at it directly since. She did not need to. She knew what was in it. What she did not know, what no one in that room knew, was that the envelope contained something the original request had not anticipated. The independent laboratory had conducted the paternity analysis under standard protocol. But in doing so, in collecting and cross-referencing the samples provided by Daniel's legal team to establish the comparison baseline, they had identified something outside the original scope of the test. Something that the laboratory's methodology required them to document and report. Something that changed everything in that room. Judge Hartwell broke the seal with a letter opener. She unfolded the pages inside with the careful deliberateness of a woman who understood the weight of what she was holding. She read. Her expression revealed nothing. She was a judge. Revealing nothing in moments of consequence was the first skill she had learned and the one she had practiced longest. She read for 87 seconds. To everyone present, it felt considerably longer. Then she set the papers flat on the bench and looked up. The DNA analysis conducted under court supervision and reviewed by Nova Diagnostics confirms with 99.97% certainty that the child carried by Serena Calloway is biologically that of Daniel Calloway. Silence. From somewhere, in Serena's chest, something that had been contracted tight for months released itself. She felt it go like a knot untied in the dark. She did not cry. She simply breathed. Clifford Baines was already writing something on his legal pad. His face was a professional blank. Daniel was not writing anything. He was looking at the surface of the table, and his expression had the quality of a man confronting something he had spent considerable energy not looking at directly. But Judge Hartwell was not finished. She looked at Daniel's table over her reading glasses. Additionally, she said, the room shifted. The laboratory's cross-referencing process, standard protocol, when multiple samples are submitted to establish a comparison baseline, has produced a secondary result that was not part of the original request. Clifford Baines had gone very still. The extended analysis indicates a 94.3% probability of a first-degree biological relationship between Daniel Calloway and a third party whose sample was present in the submission set provided by the petitioner's legal team. The room did not understand this for 4 seconds, and then Margaret Doyle understood it. She turned and looked at Serena. Serena looked at her. Across the room, Clifford Baines had stopped writing. His pen was motionless on the legal pad. Because the third sample, the one that had been included in the submission set by Daniel's own attorneys to establish the comparison framework, had come from Victoria Hargrove. Victoria Hargrove, who was not in this courtroom today. Victoria Hargrove, who was Daniel's director of client strategy, his affair partner, the woman he had chosen over his pregnant wife. Victoria Hargrove, who had claimed in every professional biography and every social introduction that she was an only child, who shared, According to Nova Diagnostics, a 94.3% probability of a first-degree biological relationship with Daniel Calloway. They shared a biological father, a father Daniel had told Serena, had told everyone, he had never known. The courtroom did not erupt. It went the opposite direction. It went so still that the overhead fluorescent lights became audible, a faint electric hum that nobody had noticed all morning. Daniel Calloway's face underwent something that was not an expression so much as a collapse of expression. Every constructed element fell away simultaneously, and what was underneath was something raw and entirely unprepared. He looked, in that moment, younger than Serena had ever seen him, not younger in a good way, younger in the way of someone who has been running from something for a very long time and has just stopped, not from choice, but from exhaustion. Clifford Baines leaned toward his client and whispered something fast and low. Daniel shook his head once. The gesture was not strategic. It was the gesture of a man who had run out of road. The journalist in the back had stopped moving entirely. He was not writing. He was listening. Lauren, in the cleared gallery, had both hands pressed flat on the railing in front of her. Margaret rose from her chair without hurry. She stood. She did not posture, did not gesture for effect. She simply stood in her pearl earrings in the fluorescent light of a Mecklenburg County courtroom and spoke in the measured voice of a woman who had been waiting for this exact moment and had no need to perform anything about it, Your Honor. In light of these findings, we move that the court strike all references to the paternity question from the formal record, that the character insinuations embedded throughout opposing counsel's pretrial strategy be formally noted and addressed in Your Honor's ruling, and that the conduct of this proceeding be documented accurately in its entirety. Judge Hartwell said, "So noted, Counselor. Here is what I need you to understand about what the secondary DNA finding actually meant, because it was not simply a dramatic revelation. It was the structural collapse of Daniel's entire legal strategy. His team had built their case on a specific foundation. That foundation had two pillars. The first pillar was that Serena's contributions to Meridian were negligible. Margaret had spent the morning dismantling that pillar document by document. The second pillar was the suggestion that Serena's character was uncertain, her loyalty questionable, the child she was using as what Baines had called emotional leverage in pre-trial motions, possibly not even Daniel's. That pillar had just been demolished by Daniel's own evidence submission. But the secondary finding did something more than collapse the paternity argument. It introduced a question that reframed every element of the previous 14 months. Victoria Hargrove was not simply a colleague with whom Daniel had developed inappropriate feelings. She was connected to him by blood through a biological father he had claimed not to know. That connection, whatever its nature, whatever its history, meant that the affair was not simply a betrayal of marriage vows. It was embedded in a secret that Daniel had kept from his wife for the entirety of their relationship. The moral authority of his legal position, already weakened by the paternity gambit and the media leak and the weaponized medical record, was now gone entirely. Clifford Baines was a good attorney. He had practiced for 32 years. He understood exactly what had happened, and he understood that the path from here to a favorable outcome for his client no longer existed. What remained was damage management, and even that had narrowed considerably. He requested a brief recess. Judge Hartwell granted 30 minutes. Serena sat at the plaintiff's table, and Lauren came through the gate and sat beside her without asking permission, and neither of them spoke for a long time. Then Lauren said, quietly, "Did you know?" "No," Serena said. "I had no idea." They sat with that for a moment. "Did you know about his father?" Lauren asked. He told me his father left before he was born, Serena said. He said he had never had any contact, that he did not know anything about him. She paused. I believed him. Lauren looked at the table. I am sorry. I do not know what to do with this yet, Serena said. But I know it is not mine to carry. Whatever this is, it belongs to him. She was right. It was one of the most emotionally intelligent things she said throughout the entire proceeding, and she said it quietly in 30 minutes of recess, without an audience. When the session resumed, the afternoon moved with a different energy. The objections from Daniel's table became less frequent. The posture of his junior associates changed. The notes on their legal pads looked different. At one point, during the afternoon session, Daniel looked up from the table, and his gaze traveled across the room and landed in the space just above Serena's head, and she caught it from the corner of her eye. She could not name what she saw in his face in that moment. It was not one thing. It was complicated and difficult, and she did not owe it any of her attention. She turned back to Margaret's notes and kept her hand steady on the table. The ruling came 18 days later, a Thursday morning in February. The Charlotte sky was the specific clear blue that only exists in winter, the kind of blue that seems too clean to be real. Lauren drove. Patricia came in the back seat with a thermos of coffee and 3 prayers she had written out by hand on index cards, which she claimed were just notes and which she held folded in her coat pocket for the entire morning. Margaret read the key sections aloud in the courthouse hallway immediately afterward because Serena's hands were not steady enough to hold the document. Equitable division of marital assets, 62% to Serena, based on her documented contributions to Meridian's growth as foundational to the company's demonstrated financial success. Primary residence awarded to Serena, who would maintain the home on Elmwood Lane until their daughter reached 18 years of age, full legal and primary physical custody of the child, with structured visitation for Daniel pending a parental fitness evaluation. Child support calculated at Daniel's full current income level, with no negotiation room built into the order. And then the paragraph Margaret read last, formally included in the ruling at Margaret's request. A paragraph in which Judge Christine Hartwell noted for the permanent record the pattern and character of the legal strategy deployed against Serena Calloway throughout these proceedings, including the paternity challenge, the evidentiary conduct regarding the medical record, and the general approach of opposing counsel throughout. It was not disciplinary action. It was documentation. It would be there permanently in the permanent record of a proceeding that was now closed. Patricia Whitmore stood in the courthouse hallway in her good wool coat and read that paragraph 3 times. Then she folded the document carefully, placed it in her pocket beside the prayers, and said one word. Good. Just that. Serena did not cry until they reached the car, not from sadness, from the specific, enormous exhaustion of having carried something very heavy for a very long time, and being given permission, finally, to put it down. They drove home. The radio played something soft. Outside the windows, Charlotte moved in its ordinary way. People walking, traffic flowing, the city entirely indifferent to the fact that something enormous had just resolved itself. Patricia made tea when they got home. Lauren stayed for dinner. They talked about ordinary things, and the ordinary felt remarkable in a way it had not for months. 3 weeks later, at 7 in the evening, Serena's phone rang. It was Margaret. I need to tell you something, Margaret said, and I want you to hear it from me before you see it anywhere else. Serena sat down at the kitchen table, the familiar position, the familiar weight of those particular words. Daniel has filed an appeal. The bottom of her stomach dropped. On what grounds? She said. Procedural. He is challenging the admissibility of the secondary DNA finding. His attorneys are arguing that it was obtained outside the scope of the original court order and should be excluded from consideration in the ruling. Can he do that? He can file, Margaret said. The question is whether an appellate court accepts it. And honestly, Serena, there is a reasonable argument that the evidentiary procedure was outside the original scope. His attorneys are not entirely wrong about that. Serena pressed her free hand flat on the kitchen table. The hydrangeas outside the window were beginning to show the first pale buds of early spring. She looked at them for a moment. What does this mean practically? She said. The ruling stands during the appeal review. The house is yours. Custody is in place. Everything is in place. But it means this is not fully resolved. It could take 6 to 18 months. 6 to 18 months. She was due in 4 weeks. This is the moment I promised you. The third blow, the one that comes after you have exhaled, after the ruling and the hallway and the tea and the ordinary dinner with people you love. This is what nobody tells you about legal battles. Winning a ruling is not the same as reaching the end. The machinery can keep moving. A determined opponent with sufficient resources can keep filing, keep appealing, keep pulling the lever. And you can be 34 weeks pregnant, sitting in your kitchen looking at hydrangea buds in the February cold, and have to decide, for what feels like the 100th time, whether you have one more round left in you. Serena was quiet on the line for a long moment. Margaret, she said finally, does he have a strong case on appeal? It is not nothing, Margaret said carefully. But no, I do not believe it is strong. Then we respond. We document the procedural legitimacy of the finding. We prepare a full response. We let him spend the time and the money. Serena, I am not afraid of this, she said. The remarkable thing was that she meant it completely. Not because she was not tired. She was exhausted in a way that had settled into her foundations weeks ago and had not lifted. But there's a specific kind of courage that only exists on the other side of having already survived the worst. It is quieter than the courage you start with. It asks less of you in performance and more of you in endurance. And it is, in every way that matters, unbreakable. Okay, Margaret said. Then we prepare. 4 weeks and 2 days later, at 3:17 in the morning, Claire Patricia Calloway arrived. 6 pounds and 9 ounces, a full head of dark hair, an opinion about the world that she communicated immediately and with absolute conviction, filling the entire maternity ward with the kind of announcement that left no ambiguity about her presence. Lauren was there. She had been asleep on the hospital room couch for 3 hours when it happened, and she woke up and began crying before she was fully conscious, which Serena found genuinely funny and which Lauren maintained was completely reasonable behavior under the circumstances. Patricia was there. She held her granddaughter for the first time and went entirely silent for 47 seconds, which was, for Patricia Whitmore, an unprecedented event in the living memory of everyone who knew her. Then she said, very softly, "Hello, sweetheart. We have been waiting." The room was warm and bright and smelled like antiseptic and something that was almost flowers. Serena held her daughter and looked at her and felt something she did not have adequate language for. This child had been present for all of it. She had been in the courtroom on that Tuesday morning. She had been in the car on the way home from every terrible phone call. She had been growing quietly and steadily in the background of the worst months of her mother's life, unhurried and certain, becoming herself, regardless of everything happening around her. "Hi," Serena said to her daughter. "I am your mom. We have had quite a year." The daughter's name, which Serena had decided on weeks ago and had not shared with anyone, was Claire. Claire Patricia Calloway. The middle name was for the woman currently in the chair by the window, who upon being informed of this fact said immediately, "That is unnecessary," and then cried for 6 minutes, which was clearly the most necessary thing in the room. 14 months later. The hydrangeas on Elmwood Lane were in full bloom, blue and enormous, exactly as she had planted them 3 years ago on a rainy April Saturday, while Daniel stood on the porch, holding coffees and laughing. The house was hers, definitively. The appeal had been dismissed 7 months prior, on a Tuesday morning, in a 2-paragraph letter from the appellate court that Margaret had forwarded with 3 words of commentary. And there it is. Daniel paid the support, on schedule without exception. He came for his structured visitation, which Claire navigated with the equanimity of a child who had never known anything different and therefore found no reason to be troubled by it. She called him Daddy, she called Serena Mom, and when she said it the way small children say things they are entirely certain of, without inflection or qualification, as a statement of simple fact. Serena did not know what Daniel felt about all of it. She did not ask. She was civil with him consistently, because Claire would know how her mother behaved in difficult situations, and that knowledge would be one of the things her mother gave her. She saw Victoria Hargrove once, a parking lot, a grocery store, a Wednesday afternoon in October. Victoria was getting out of her car. Serena was returning her cart. They were 40 feet apart, and there was no avoiding the mutual recognition. Victoria looked at her. Serena looked back. Then Serena nodded. Once, simply, without warmth and without hostility, and walked to her car. She did not think about it again that day. That, she understood later, was what moving on actually felt like. Not a declaration, not a dramatic moment, just a moment that passed, and you let it pass, and your life continued in the direction you had chosen. On a Saturday in June, Serena sat on the front porch of the house on Elmwood Lane. Claire was 14 months old and was engaged in the serious project of redistributing every item in her toy basket onto the porch floor, examining each one with the focused attention of someone who has a very specific organizational vision and the patience to execute it. Lauren was in the chair across from Serena, feet up on the railing, narrating the project as though it were a competitive event. "And she goes for the stacking rings," Lauren said. "No, she has reconsidered. She is back to the wooden blocks. Bold choice? Very bold." "She does this for 45 minutes, Serena said. "I know, I have watched. I am invested in the outcome." Patricia was inside, making something that involved the oven, and smelled like Sunday, which was the only description Serena had ever needed for that particular smell. The street was quiet. Someone was mowing a lawn 3 houses down. The sound was distant and rhythmic and entirely ordinary. The hydrangeas were in full bloom along the front walk, enormous and blue and completely indifferent to everything that had occurred in their presence over the past year and a half. Claire looked up from the toy basket. She had Serena's eyes, dark and direct and entirely decided. She held up a wooden block. She presented it to her mother with the gravity of someone offering evidence of something important. "Yeah," Serena said. Claire made a sound of absolute conviction. "I agree completely," Serena said. Lauren laughed. "The real kind. The kind that starts somewhere deep and surprises you when it arrives." And Serena leaned back in her chair on the porch of the house where she had planted hydrangeas 3 years ago and let the Saturday do what Saturdays do. "Here's the last thing I want to say, and I want to say it to you directly, because this is where the story becomes about more than Serena Calloway. Every person who has ever sat at a kitchen table at 11:30 at night reading a document that weaponizes their worst day. Every person who has ever watched a witness withdraw because the cost of telling the truth was too high. Every person who has had something real and invisible and essential about their contributions denied in a room designed to determine the value of things. This story is about that. It is about what it takes to keep going when you have already survived the worst, and then the next worst comes anyway. It is about the particular courage of choosing one more round when you are this tired. It is about the truth, which is inconvenient and slow and frequently untimely, but which has an extraordinary record of arrival. Document everything. Trust the people who show up. Keep a record of your contributions, not because you expect betrayal, but because what you build deserves to be seen. And when they tell you that your 14 years or 7 years or 20 years of invisible, essential work is worth $14,000, let Margaret Doyle look them in the eye and show them Exhibit 1. Serena Calloway did not become someone defined by what was done to her. She became someone who went through it, documented it, fought for it, collapsed in a courtroom, and got back up, and came out the other side with her daughter and her house and her name intact. Claire held up another wooden block, another piece of evidence. Yeah, Serena said. I see it. Outside, the lawnmower continued its distant rhythm. The hydrangeas held their color in the afternoon light, blue and certain and entirely permanent. The world was doing what the world does, beginning again, without ceremony or announcement, just beginning. Final closing statement: the content you just heard was carefully researched, constructed, and manually edited by our team, not generated carelessly, not taken lightly. Every story we bring you is built with the intention of meaning something. Thank you for spending your time with us. It is not something we take for granted.